Emergency workers appear to be making a major headway as the debris of the collapsed building in Ikoyi nears ground zero. Theophilus Elama reports on this.
Efforts to clear the huge rubble occasioned by the collapse of the building in Ikoyi have been ongoing. The Lagos State government announced that 42 bodies were recovered on Sunday, but emergency responders later reported an additional 2 were retrieved, increasing the number to 44. With the work going on so far, the federal government has directed the Nigerian Army Corps engineers to join in efforts to clear the debris now nearing ground zero. According to a statement from the Southwest Zonal Coordinator of NEMA, Ibrahim Farinloye, the federal government had directed the Corps to assist the state in carting away the rubble from this site. While the rubble is being cleared, the state government has directed families of victims to go to the Infectious Disease Hospital IDH Yaba to identify their loved ones who might have been affected by the collapse.
So if you go to General Hospital on Lagos Island, that's where the survivors are. I followed Mr. Governor and Mr. Deputy Governor to the place to see the survivors myself. And like I have said here this afternoon, if you go to IDH Yaba, as from 4 p.m., you will be able to do see some of the bodies for identification. The thing is that they cannot, there are rules of, giving bodies to people.
While this rubble comes down to ground zero, it seems not many are optimistic of a recovery of any sort. Everyone waits with bated breath for the outcome of the committee put together by the state government to determine the cause of this collapse. Theophilus Elama, TVC News, Lagos.
I have with me the former president, Nigeria Institute of Structural Engineers, Engineer Oreoluwa Fadayomi. It's nice to have you join me, Engineer.
Thank you.
Welcome to the studio.
Good morning.
Great. Now, I know you've been following this development, and especially for your profession, this must be a very sad time for all of you, and not just you, but all of us, especially when a life is lost in any incident of this kind. But talk to us. Following a collapse of a building of this nature that we've been talking about and following since the last week, there are other structures around that collapsed building. How does this threaten the other ones?
Well, first of all, it's a tragedy, we all know, and our heart goes to the families of the traumatized people, the bereaved ones, and so on and so forth. Having said that, you just raised a pertinent question. There are buildings around the place. And when a thing like that happens, those days when we were children, we used to play by the riverside. If you throw a pebble into the water, it drops. And what does it do? Send ripples. And you could see it travel far and wide. Therefore, when you have a bang like that, it's like an earthquake. And those that listened and witnessed it thought it was an earthquake that happened. It's a sudden fall of load, rapid, which pressure would change the constituent of the soil within the area. Such a phenomenon is called liquefaction.
Liquefaction?
Exactly. Where a solid mass now behaves like water. And so you have horizontal waves traveling within the vicinity. And the geotechnical engineers will be able to discuss more about it, and this is one of the reasons they have to be involved in this kind of investigation. So when you have such ripples, depending now on the type of foundation that such buildings have, if it is piling, if it is end-bearing meaning it just sits directly into a hard rock. If it is not end-bearing, if it is the friction type, You can now imagine something that is being held by a solid thing before, now being surrounded by water. There could be subsidence. There could be all sorts of things. So it needs to be properly investigated. Some buildings right now may show no signs of anything, but gradually, because the soil has been compromised, you now see all sorts of cracks developing over time around the foundation, within the walls, and so on and so forth. So a thorough professional investigation must be done so that we all learn from this.
All right. Now, of course, in the news reports we got, some of the ideals of the processes that were supposed to have been, checked, with the box checked, this is check, this is check, this is check. Something went wrong along the process. But talk to us about the ideals of a structure like that of 15 stories or maybe even 21 stories, whichever one that one wants to build in that. What are the necessary precautions and processes that one should embark on to have that kind of a structure anywhere, for instance?
It starts not just with the construction. It starts with the design.
Okay.
And for such a design, for such a structure, you need to have a seasoned, competent structural engineer. Because without the structural engineer, nothing can stand. I mean, we're in this building because the structural engineer has done his job well. Otherwise, nothing can stand. So you start with the structural engineer who does the design the way he has been doing it over the years, because that is his area of core competence. I always tell people, you don't call a tailor to come and do a carpenter's job. And this is apt in this particular case. So you need the structural engineer. And when the structural engineer now completes his design, I mean, I'm summarizing this because there are so many things that go into the design. I mean, if the framing of it in particular, for instance, when you have such a high-rise building, there are areas we call strong points. And these are like the lift walls, like the staircase walls, and so on and so forth, that are expected to hold forth in case of any unforeseen, so that you will not have if it sways one way, it can pull it back. So all those strong points are supposed to be embedded in the arrangement of the entire thing. And this design, when completed, is now sent to the approval body or approving body. The approving body is not just any engineer. It has to be competent. In actual fact, the body that approves, in most cases, should know better than the designer, if at least at par with the designer himself, so that where anything seems to be going wrong, he can spot it. So when an incompetent person is made to want to approve something he doesn't even have an experience over, he just glosses over it and signs approved. But that is the subject of the investigation.
What is the difference between, because you're talking about a design?
I've not even started talking about the construction.
Very good. But what's the place of the architect and then the structural engineer? Yeah,
you see, the architect gives you the layout of the building, okay, the pictorial view. Okay. It's like you have my picture here, and the picture is on paper. It won't stand unless you have someone like the sculpturist that puts the frame, the frames, and now patches it with, call it flesh, to make it stand in 3D. That is when you can put that picture on the ground and it stands. So the architect provides the pictorial flow, while the structural engineer gives it the backbone that makes it to stand. It's like the skeleton of a human being.
That's like the prototype.
Exactly. So it's like the skeleton of a human being. You have all the skeleton. The skeleton will stand but it won't look like a human being until you start to put flesh and eyes and head into it. So that is the architecture. Without the architecture, there is nothing the engineer would design, because each one has its own line of professionalism. So it is the architect that conceives the entire thing, and it is the structural engineer that makes the entire thing to stand. Of course, there are other services, electrical, mechanical, that gives the convenience of the stay within
So
the
at what point does the civil engineer comes in here to begin to do the actual construction of the structure?
You use the word civil engineer. Civil engineering is a broad-based word. It's like a medical doctor that has completed his MBBS and goes into general practice. But when it now comes to specialized practices like cardiology, ophthalmology, and so on, these are specialized areas. That is where the structural engineer differs from the civil engineer. A structural engineer is first and foremost a civil engineer before he specializes in that particular area. The civil engineer could be in water, could be in all of that. It may not even be in structures. But there are some civil engineers that are also in structures. And that is the difference in that particular area. So when you talk about the civil engineer in construction, the civil engineer in construction may have had a good experience in construction. So, but primarily for this kind of thing, you have the structural engineer assisted by the builder. The builder is trained in the art of putting together all those things on site, overseen by the structural engineer to see to it that most of the things that they have designed are exactly what are being built on site. Geotechnical engineers are civil engineers, for instance. But without them, the structural engineer cannot even design the foundation. So we all complement each other. And of course, the drainages, the roads, and so on and so forth, they are civil engineering work. So it's a whole gamut of professional coalition that comes into that.
In your own assessment of what has happened to this collapsed building in Ikoyi that we're talking about, what do you think went wrong?
This would be like preempting the outcome of the investigation, because they are expected to look deeper. All that we have been seeing flying around at best can be regarded as rumors. But there are some evidences which one cannot gloss over. And if we are looking in any direction, there is the client who is unfortunately gone now. There is the contractor who unfortunately happened one way or the other to be perhaps the client. That one will be unraveled. You have the engineers that designed. You have the government, in particular, the government that ought to have done the control, one form or the other, to say to it that everything that they approved to have been done are being done. And the government in particular, when we heard that they were trying to perform their function, but somehow when they got there, they were disallowed from gaining access. They finally gained access. They saw some things that went wrong, and they shut the site. We heard that. And
that was sometime last year.
Yeah, and they shut the site. The investigation panel, there are questions to ask. What did they see that made them to close the site? And they reopened the site. What have they seen that made them to reopen the site? So those are they are systemic things that needs to be checked. The supervising engineer, we got to know that at a point in time he withdrew his services. When he withdrew his services, he cited some reasons which he did not particularly elaborate upon in his letter. They need to be invited. What happened? What did you see that made you to withdraw your services? When we got there, we saw another name on the board. What happened? One way or the other, from eyewitnesses, it's like probably there were up to 3 or 4 engineers in the series. Who are they? What happened? And back to the other building that was standing. If the engineer that supervised to a point of withdrawal supervised those ones that were standing, are we saying that those things that made him to withdraw from the first one is not inherent in the other ones? So this is the reason why there must be a thorough investigation. Eyewitnesses have confirmed that there were signs, cracks on walls, splitting of columns, retrofitting work going on. Were they done the proper way? What led to this? There were no proper investigation, at least that has surfaced for now, for anyone to want to jump to conclusion. And these are some of the things that one expects the investigative panel to unravel. There are a lot of mysteries. Unfortunately, the pivot, the center, the action point is gone. We may never get to the exact root, but we'll make attempts to see.
All right, you talked about issues of a signboard earlier. Where you have a major construction, there's usually a signboard telling you different things. How significant is that? Because you just made reference to that now.
Oh, it's very significant. First of all, by virtue of our experiences, we know all sorts of things happen. And if a person that is not professionally qualified to do a kind of work like this, you want to run away from publicity. So you won't want your name to be there. But if you have nothing to hide, you are qualified to do what it is, your name will be boldly written. The architect, the project manager, the contractor, the structural engineer, the services engineer, all the people, quantity surveyors, everybody's name, address, telephone number, all contacts will be there, so that those that are even carrying out oversight functions don't have to dig into anything to know, oh, these are the people involved. Oh, I know them. I can easily call them for A or B or C. See what has happened in this case. The governor told us that they don't have information. The thing that is on the signboard, if you call the numbers, they point to perhaps the same person in about 3 or 4 cases. So we don't know where to go. So these are the reasons, part of the reasons why you must have them displayed there.
All right, we had one of the a surveyor around yesterday, and he was talking to us about the nature of houses in Lagos. In fact, he was saying that there could likely still be more building collapse in Lagos with so many kind of structures the way they are. What do you make of a statement like that? Because this is not the first or second or third or fourth incidences of building collapse in Lagos.
Yes. When I was told that I will be coming to this interview, or for this to feature here. I sent a video which perhaps I thought would be played. It shows how some of us see geotechnical works. It showed a borehole machine sinking a hole in the ground, and someone now running a rod down it and just pouring whatever into the rod, calling it piling. That is quackery. That is unprofessional. So you have different sets of engineers, in quote, doing all manners of work. And unfortunately, the controlling body, government, do not have the numbers in terms of supervision.
Do you think that's the weakest link?
It's one of the links. You see, the numbers are not there to see everywhere.
Right.
They are trying their best, but the numbers are just not there. So they need help. And where all of these things go unsupervised, unseen, unknown, by the time the building and the shell is up, it's already colored. You don't know what's gone in there. Therefore, one would still expect these kind of things to happen unless they are quickly unraveled.
All right. Engineer Oreoluwa Fadayomi, thank you so much for coming on the program. We certainly will be looking forward to discussing this more, because this has a way of enlightening people and drawing attention to what people should look out for in some of the buildings and structures we have around.
You see,
Thank you very much.
one last point,
Yes.
really. When we talk about structural integrity, a lot of people miss the point. They take it to imply, go there, test concrete, test reinforcement. That is not it. It's like you go to your doctor and your doctor sends you to the laboratory for a blood test. You now come back with the result of the blood test. Who analyzes it? It is the person that sends you. So unless the structural engineer who orders that test of concrete be done, alkaline thing be done, looks at it,
All right.
and does his design,
Okay.
you don't say you have an integrity
All right.
test.
Thank you very much. We certainly will keep those in mind as well. And that's a point of enlightenment too. Thank you.
Thank you very
Great.
much. Yeah.
All right.